When something of the magnitude of Chewbacca appearing on the Clone Wars happens, you can always rest assured as the audience that this comes directly from George Lucas. And so there we were in the story meeting. We're gonna do our Ahsoka story, and George says, and I would like Chewbacca in this story. So okay, you're gonna get Chewbacca. As soon as George described these stories to us, I said, man, I gotta direct both of these. And they're both about Ahsoka. And I always feel very connected to that storyline. And I wanted to make sure that the crew was hyper aware of how important bringing Chewbacca to the screen was gonna be, and that we stayed focused the whole time to make him authentic Chewbacca.
So what we did very early on, what Dave really wanted to do, which I thought was brilliant, was we brought Peter Mayhew to meet with the crew. We wanted to have a question and answer period.
Yeah, everyone was just rapt. I mean, they just were listening to him. They were absorbing every little moment, and made a difference to talk to Peter, to meet Peter, for everyone involved, making the models, doing the hair. I mean, they got this sense not just of who Chewbacca was and what his character should be like, but I think they also got a sense of, like, here's this man, Peter Mayhew, that has really embodied Chewbacca for all these years, and we have to do right by this. This has to be something that he likes. It's just really informative on just how, when you're in the suit, even what that was like in the suit. And we actually got this suit out.
The eyes, obviously, are of major importance.
Well, that's the real trick, isn't it?
It's body language and eye language.
Chewie has a peculiar walk, which is unique to me.
It's the angle, it's the knock-kneed approach.
Yeah.
You watch me walk, and it's Chewie to the T.
This is from A New Hope.
You look at any picture, Chewie's mouth is almost always open.
Always open. So we have to make sure the animators get that too. Always kind of open.
This couldn't be, Chewie's stunt double or a Wookiee that looked okay. It had to be very specifically that character, and that's really where the challenge came in. We were very lucky because we still have Darren Marshall on the crew, who can sculpt pretty much anything and find a way to simplify it but keep it really true to the essence of what that thing is.
So for Chewbacca, we tried to go for the original look from A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. The reason being is that the fur on the Chewbacca from those two, we felt it was going to be easier to translate to the style of the show. I mean, we really went to town on the details, like the underbite on the bottom of the jaw, the eye alignment, the amount of attention to detail on Chewbacca, even the teeth, the canine teeth are kind of angled outwards, as you can see. Just little things like that, we'll try and make it as accurate as we could. You see it, you know it's Chewbacca.
So after we did all of that, we then brought Peter Mayhew back up, because we wanted to show him the work. We wanted him to see the culmination of everything that we had done, that he had helped kickstart and put in motion.
When he comes round and they say, what's that? There's something there.
Yeah.
And gradually, as he unfolds, you see the hair come back, and it's a Wookiee.
With you and George, I know when you watch it, you'll know the difference. There's a certain way the character is, and it's not just the big, hairy Sasquatch guy. There's a real character there.
Everything is right. The face is great. You guys have done a wonderful job.
Your name is Chewbacca.
When we showed it to George, when George was impressed with all the visuals and everything, he said that when I saw him turn around, I knew I was looking at Chewbacca.
It's a Wookiee.
And that's just as good as it can get.
When I direct an episode, I try to test the pipeline. I try to see how far we can go with an episode. So I wanted to push the idea of the organic environments in this episode more than we had ever done before. So I started describing to Tara Ruping this kind of big tangled mess of a canopy that was like where rabbits would go and hide in a thicket, but where little tiny people on these giant branches all twisting around in every direction, that it would be easy to get lost in this environment.
I really wanted to push this kind of fantastic environment with waterfalls that are coming, plants hanging and stuff like that, and pushing the stylization, having the forms kind of foreboding and arcing over the characters. I also wanted to make sure that The floor of the island too was so dense and making that really threatening, foreboding, entrapment feeling.
There wasn't anywhere in this entire environment that looked comfortable, you know? I mean, even the beach doesn't look like a beach you'd want to hang out on. It's just a nasty, very unforgiving, hostile place to be. And then the palette, which is a sort of acidic green, it's just, everything about it is really harsh, you know? Everything was sort of very intentionally kept as uncomfortable and, you know, inhospitable looking as possible. From before you even approach the planet, you can kind of get a sense that this is not going to be a fun place to go.
Everything was a challenge. And as we were blocking it out and filming it, I started looking at all these big branches and I started going, man, I don't know if this is really going to look good. It wasn't, you know, I'm not talking about the compositions, I'm talking about the surfaces of these shapes. You could tell that it was a really highly detailed painting that was kind of wrapped around an object. It wasn't tangible enough.
We were worried the sets themselves would look like just jumbled mess of rubber tubes. And working with Josh Rowe, who's my right-hand man for effects development, came up with a method to take any part of our geometry and to emit on that geometry a bunch of little things that look like thorns and curlicues and twigs and branches really quickly. And it would just litter it real quick.
Joel started filling it with ants and bugs and butterflies and little creepy crawly things and mist and, you know, a sense of humidity. It definitely was, for us, a very big moment visually. And it just makes you feel like I'm in this environment finally.
So it was that little tiny tidbit that really shattered the way we do our environments in general.
That was just a tremendous moment where I thought, now we're finally starting to look like something, and we're going to use this in the future to make everything we're doing better.
It's important to light our show now as if it's a feature, as if you're really trying to tell the story with lighting. It's amazing how we went from lighting concept to lighting the shot, and they just look exact. It's exactly how we wanted it. In Padawan's Lost, there's a sequence when Khalifa gets shot.
Khalifa!
That's where I needed to turn that entire jungle set into darkness. To just all of a sudden let it feel like it's all coming down on you, and you're that last hope of light, but you're continuing to shine.
Ahsoka, leave me. I won't.
We kept bringing it down, like tunnel vision, right down to the point of where you're so sucked in on that conversation. And then you pull back to a wide shot when Ahsoka stands up and everything else is black and she's just hit by this light, and the shadow from her shards of light are shining down onto Khalifa, and then she just exits screen right. It's that moment of that she's all alone. So by putting that little stuff into our show, I really feel we're adding that cinematic quality that'll hold viewers in without even realizing why they're being sucked into the show.
Myself and Matt Meknowitz, the writer, we both felt very strongly that the Trandoshans were the perfect enemy for this series, because they, historically in the EU, are said to hunt down Wookiees and slave trade Wookiees, and it seemed to set up a great conflict.
The sun has risen. Let the hunt begin!
When we knew that we were going to see more Trandoshans, rather than sort of take Bossk and just revisit that but not do much to it, we saw it as an opportunity to introduce much harder sort of reptilian shapes into the silhouettes that you see, and also just add a little bit more detail to the head so that it wasn't quite as soft as the Bossk character turned out to be in Lethal Trackdown. There was more of a conscious effort to come up with different sort of shapes and silhouettes and builds.
I wanted them to have more stripes on their faces, and the idea that some of them had like feathered crowns on their head. They were different colors, different patterns.
They were all designed by Pat Presley, who sort of became the creature, monster guru for season 3.
Darren Marshall, he set the boss look already. He designed boss for his episode, and then I simply just used those design as my jumping off point. So we changed a different body types, and the focus is the fact that they are hunters. So you have like a shooting jacket, shooting vest, pouches, jungle outfit, safari outfits, mixed in there with camouflage.
They look so much more superior than poor Bossk. So here's, I guess a tiny spoiler would be we redid Bossk as a result of these episodes for the future. So yes, Bossk will be back. But we had to improve him because these transitions were so much more alive in so many ways than Bossk. The original script had the hunting lodge on the ground, hidden in the jungle. And, at the story beat out session and everything, I thought, well, that's a little strange that the other younglings haven't found this place and all the time they've been there, and it felt a little convenient that they finally find it when Ahsoka shows up. So when Killian Plunkett and I were discussing this early on and going over the script again, he suggested, well, why don't we try putting the hunting lodge up in the sky? To which I thought that was a fantastic idea.
It was a pretty strange blend of established spaceship that we'd already worked out, feudal Japanese castle, and oil rig. The interior of the lodge was designed by Wayne Lowe and is one of the sort of most intricate, involved, really, really decked out sets that we've ever done in the series. There are so many different things inside this set that, you would have to check with the assets department, but I'm pretty sure there are like hundreds of things in that room if you add them all up.
It's it's the Rancho Obi-Wan of Clone Wars. It's where all the collectibles are. It's basically every animal asset that we created for the series is in there, stuffed in some form. We have a Gungan stuffed, some of the ice creatures from Trespass in there, Zillo Beast scales that are the floor to the entranceway with Zillo Beast teeth and tail spikes in the back, Jedi Padawan braids hanging in the back, a Mandalorian Crusader helmet. We have a Wampa skin that's draped over Garnak's throne. There are Wookiee skins hanging on the wall. Oddly, we have the Crystal Skull from Indiana Jones. And I'm sure there's more stuff than that. Those transitions have been busy. They collected a lot of stuff.
Now!
In this episode, among other things, wanting the story to work, wanting the character arcs to work, I wanted to have some big action set pieces. And I wanted to try to push things to be in a very high cinematic level, meaning that I wanted to give the audience some action sequences that I thought you would only get normally on a big budget feature. So when it came to the crash of the Trandoshan slave ship, I said, this is it. This is where I want this giant moment. And it's going to reveal Chewbacca. This has to be big. So there were a lot of interesting elements that we could play with Ahsoka inside. And, once she's in that fight in there and she kicks the guy and he hits the steering wheel, it's going to start tilting the ship. And I wanted this whole thing rotating over the water as it's spinning slightly faster. And we just crashed it right into the beach. And, this is almost like, okay, Joel, what can you do?
Well, I didn't want to do a typical splash here. I wanted to go back to the style of anime. In developing that, we looked back at the technique that I developed for the Rooster Tail in season 1 and used that same method of emitting geometry. It just comes out like little spikes, it's like broken shards of glass that stick out of the water. Well, you combine that with particles and have that fade out a little bit, and it looks like a big splash. So we use that over and over again. The nice thing is with that geometry is you can scale it real down low. So if you watch as that's breaking off, there's little tiny pieces hitting the water and you're seeing little tiny splashes around. You'll see that the sand doesn't just kick up. There's huge spikes of sand that are visible in those few frames. And you see the spikes, and then they just fall as sand. As simple as it sounds, it was the most difficult sequence. It involved the most people and the most time on the episode.
And then we're going to wrap it up with sound design and Matt Wood and Dave Acord. And we're going to have a great sequence because they're going to lend it all the reality that you would get in a big feature.
The spaceship crash was, if you listen to it, it's a really complicated scene. The way we kind of go back and forth and back and forth. There was just a ton of elements that kind of went into that. There's the creaking ship as it's coming apart, all these little explosions, electrical arcing. When we go inside the ship, it's a totally different world in there. There's all the little instrument panel explosions. As we go back outside, and we've got wind, and the ship is now spinning out of control. The crash into the water. That was a fun scene to cut. That was a lot of. That's a lot of sound. Yeah.
Well, I guess we won't be escaping on that ship.
When I set out to do this episode, I made sure that I had the time for a proper ending. This is a big moment. Ahsoka has been on her own. Anakin has been forced to let go. The scene where they reunite is important, and it cannot be short.
Ahsoka!
This is the moment for Ahsoka. This is the moment where she says, "It's because of you and your training that I survived, Master. Even though you weren't there. You're a part of me. You can let go of that attachment."
And because of you, I did survive.
These are ideas that Anakin struggles with.
Stay with me.
His mother, Padme, Obi-Wan. People that he cares about, even R2. Yoda in the Clone Wars movie is trying to teach Anakin, through giving him a Padawan, to let go of his attachments. And Yoda knows there will come a point in time where Anakin will have to let go of that attachment, where he'll be faced with a situation where Ahsoka will be on her own, as Anakin's mother was on her own. And that there won't be anything Anakin can do to stop what's going to happen to Ahsoka or not. This is that moment. It's taken 3 seasons, but this episode arc is that moment where Anakin comes face to face with his worst fear, Ahsoka in a situation there's nothing he can do.
Ahsoka, I am so sorry.
And this is her moment to say thank you. This is completely different than where she started in the movie. And she respectfully bows. I mean, when have you ever seen Anakin and Ahsoka really respectfully bow to each other? They walk off the landing platform with a different relationship than they had before. Anakin is much more settled. And you see Yoda, and he just silently watches this. And in a rare moment, we see Yoda smile because he feels that things, for once, are moving as he would have hoped. And that there is a possibility that this story will be written in a way that Yoda hopes happens. Now, unfortunately, we know that's not the case. And we know that Anakin, in the end, does turn to the dark side and become Darth Vader. It's going to be exciting to the finish. I can guarantee that.